Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. The corruption and weaponization of the FBI continues. So first we had the Russian hoax, despite it being entirely concocted by Clinton campaign proxies. Partisan FBI lent an air of credibility to the whole sham in order to destroy the Trump presidency. So the FBI also, in that story, obtained FISA warrants to spy on private citizens, despite knowing that Christopher Steele and his little dossier was an unsubstantiated product of opposition party research that the FBI wouldn't even stand by. And it's perhaps the biggest political scandal in American history. And again, DOJ, FBI, all at the center of it. Then we head to the plot to kidnap Democrat Governor Gretchen Whitmer, in which most of the kidnappers actually involved in the plot, planning the plot, and recruiting people were literal FBI agents. So why did the FBI work so hard to incite people to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer? And why her? Simple. They wanted to blame the kidnapping on the right to reinforce this Democrat narrative that there's an ever-present white supremacist conservative threat in the United States. And the more we learn about January 6th, the more it looks like the FBI played some kind of role in fomenting and stoking unrest that day on Capitol Hill. Why? Well, apparently to label all Trump supporters as insurrectionists and enemies of the state, as the Biden administration and Democrats have done. And then last week, there was the raid, 3 now, on the whole Project Veritas crew and James O'Keefe and other employees' houses on this bogus, insane pretext. Even the ACLU has defended Project Veritas, saying that this could, quote, have serious consequences for press freedom. The Biden administration just wanted to shut them up because they still do actual investigative journalism. But perhaps nothing so illustrates the FBI's corruption at the hands of the DOJ as its targeting of everyday American parents and the crimes of those parents caring about their children, speaking out against indoctrination, racialization, and sexualization of their children by America's public schools. These outspoken parents have been an absolute political tidal wave. And it has gone truly viral all across the country. Clips of parents from school board meetings from all walks of life. They keep racking up views by the millions, and it is such a problem for Democrats. See, they thought that their whole Marxist woke revolution would proceed uninterrupted. But then they got between moms and dads and their kids. And that's exactly what the Marxist left wants to do. They want to usurp parental authority, so your kids are just simply wards of the state. But in doing so, Marxist Democrats triggered that protection instinct in parents. There is perhaps no instinct stronger in human nature. Animals fight to the death to protect their young, thinking nothing of what happens to them. So what do you do if you're Democrats? The uppity parents cannot be silenced or cowed because their kids' well-being is on the line, and they don't care what you say about them. They don't care what you do to them. They don't care how many times you try to dox them or smear them. They're not going to shut up. And that's what Democrats have decided to do, what they always do in a situation like this. If they can't win in municipal elections like in our town, then they'll try to weaponize government agencies against their enemies and their agency of choice, the FBI, which is now an arm of teachers' unions. This time, they're after parents who are now considered potential domestic terrorists if they so much as disagree with school boards on masking or mandating injections for kids or teaching institutionalized Marxist racism, aka critical race theory, or whatever theory, queer, straight, otherwise. I don't even know what the terms are anymore. They change every day. This activation of the FBI was all done at the request of the National School Board Association, and they asked MERRICK Garland, Attorney General, to investigate parents as, again, possible domestic terrorists, direct quote. And of course, Garland, who is a total stooge, immediately complied. So stop for a second. The FBI doesn't even care about Antifa, who Chris Wray, remember, FBI Director Chris Wray says was an ideology, not an organization, because apparently you need like a Costco membership card to be taken seriously. There's been no DOJ or FBI task force or sting against Antifa, who physically assaults, harasses, burns down buildings, attacks innocent people. Any investigative task force after a summer of BLM riots and Antifa riots? Anything by the FBI? No. Hell, they can't even look into Epstein or the coach of the Olympic gymnast who reported to the FBI over and over again that Larry Nassar was molesting them, and the FBI looked the other way. But instantly, Merrick Garland's DOJ leaps into action at the request of the National School Board Association. I mean, after all, they got taxpayer dollars going to some of these teachers' unions here. The NSBA even had to walk their statement back and all their claims. Here, the DOJ's Deputy Attorney General being grilled by Senator Josh Hawley, who points out that we've entered a new McCarthy era, and parents are now the target. Watch.
Ms. Monaco, I want to come back to this extraordinary letter and memorandum that the Attorney General of the United States issued yesterday, practically every day brings new reports about this administration weaponizing the federal bureaucracy to go after political opponents. Frankly, I don't think we've ever seen anything like it in American history. I mean, for those of us who missed the McCarthy era, I guess this president is intent on bringing it to us, but with new force and new power and new urgency, unlike anything we've ever seen. Are you aware of any time in American history when an attorney general has directed the FBI to begin to intervene in school board meetings, local school board meetings?
I'm not aware, and I'm not aware that is not going on.
Yeah, it is. Of course, the DOJ denied that they were targeting parents for exercising their right to free speech. Also, when it was Merrick Garland's turn to answer questions, it became super clear that he never even vetted the claims that the NSBA made. He didn't even look into them. He just directed the FBI and U.S. attorney's offices to investigate the threats because the DOJ is corrupt and the NSBA is corrupt. And they're all corrupt and in cahoots with each other. So here Garland's being grilled by Republican Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana. Watch.
Now, when you got the letter from the White House that prompted your memorandum to give the FBI new duties in making sure our parents aren't dangerous domestic terrorists, you didn't investigate before you issued your memorandum the incidences cited in the letter, did you?
Look, I took a statement by the National Association, which represents thousands of school board members, when they said that they were facing violence and threats of violence, and when I saw in the news media reports.
Yeah, but you didn't investigate the incidents in the letter, did you?
No, this is the first step. This is an assessment step. It comes before investigations. The purpose
right. Before you issued your memo, you didn't investigate the incidents.
The memo is intended to begin assessments. It is intended to
and in fact, most of the incidents in the letter did not involve threats of violence, did they?
I think that's correct. Most of them did not.
Yeah.
No, all of them did not. And by the way, the assessment, that wasn't an assessment. This was already underway. The NSBA, after intense pressure, had apologized for their letter. Yet Merrick Garland didn't call off the FBI. And he denied using counterterrorism tools to target parents who were speaking up. Remember, he was under oath. Well, guess what? This failure to ever get on the Supreme Court, and by the way, for all the people who yell about Mitch McConnell, that was Mitch McConnell who kept Merrick Garland off the Supreme Court. You can love him or hate him, but that happened. Merrick Garland lied. A whistleblower within the FBI leaked an email showing that, in fact, the Bureau did indeed create a system to track threats against school board officials. Threats against school board officials and administrators. The FBI whistleblower also accused Attorney General Merrick Garland of misleading lawmakers when he was asked about the subject during his previous testimony before the committee. Get this, the FBI's counterterrorism and criminal divisions even created a threat tag called EDU officials to track instances of related threats, according to the email. They said the purpose of the threat tag is to help scope this threat on a national level and provide an opportunity for comprehensive analysis of the threat picture for effective engagement with law enforcement. White House Republicans retained these documents, and in a letter to Merrick Garland, Republican Jim Jordan said this to the AG, quote, "At best, if we assume that you were ignorant of the FBI's actions in response to your October 4th memorandum at the time of your testimony, this new evidence suggests your testimony was incomplete and requires additional explanation. If, however, you were aware of the FBI's actions at the time of your testimony, this evidence showed that you willfully misled the committee about the nature and extent of the department's use of counterterrorism tools to target concerned parents at school board meetings." So, yeah, of course they were absolutely aware. They had to do that because too many parents were too successful criticizing their school boards. So let's recap. This scandalous, he should resign. In fact, he should be drummed out of office. Attorney General Merrick Garland is a traitor to voters, a traitor to the country that he serves by misusing his authority in this office in this respect. He provided zero evidence that parents are engaging in any kind of credible threats or acts of violence. And look, I say this as someone who has personally gone through this. When you get threats, You file a police report. Everything starts local because they cannot continue or progress the case without a report to go along with it. And if there were this many reports going around, as they claim there were, to escalate it up to the level of the federal government, to escalate it all the way up to the Department of Justice and FBI, then there's going to be a lot of police reports out there to corroborate this. And we all know in the history of the press, they've been incredibly easy to get, except all of a sudden now, no, but they went ahead and they weaponized the FBI Counterterrorism Division, to use counterterrorism tools. I mean, they're not using them to track actual terrorists like in the Pulse nightclub shooting, or in Garland, Texas, that shooting, or in Boston, or in any place else where they've had terrorists who have acted, or by the way, in Charlotte, where you had a prohibited possessor who was able to get by a background check because the FBI later had to admit that they screwed up his paperwork and he ended up shooting up a church. They're too busy not paying attention to that because they're using all their tools for investigating, tracking, and tagging people who are critical of any kind of Democrat administration. But then Merrick Garland, he denied any knowledge of doing so before Congress under oath. He used the FBI to run interference for teachers' unions and to suppress middle-class American families and chill their constitutionally protected speech. So just to be frank, we have an absolutely unscrupulous AG who lies to hide his corruption. He makes money off of data mining your kids and CRT. And we have an FBI that's repeatedly being weaponized to advance the party's agenda. They're willing to even call parents domestic terrorists to get their way and track them. By the way, remember when all of us who hated the Patriot Act? Now you see why. Now they're tracking them with counterterrorism measures. By the way, those were made possible by the Patriot Act. And then AG Garland has the stones to lie about it in front of Congress. He's not going to resign. He's too selfish, and this administration is too clueless. This AG is everything that is wrong with our corrupt and authoritarian government, and I feel such schadenfreude that he was never, ever put on Supreme Court. We have two systems of law, one for Marxist Democrats who can do almost anything. They can riot, they can assault, they can burn down entire city blocks, weaponize government agencies to You can be a pedophile like a Kenosha rioter, Joseph Rosenbaum, and the left celebrates you as long as you're a leftist hero, as long as you advance their narratives. Child molestation be damned. The second system of law is for conservatives. For conservatives, simply attending a rally can get you in real trouble. Talking about it can get you in real trouble. For you, just defending yourself in a riot like Kyle Rittenhouse or the McCloskeys in St. Louis gets you called a white supremacist, even though in Kenosha, the people that you shot were white people burning down black-owned businesses. You know, if you want to have a discussion of race. Merely speaking up at a board meeting can get you put on an FBI watch list. At this point, if you're an FBI agent with integrity, I have people tell me all the time, Dana, it's the upper echelon of the agency. It's not everyone. If I was an FBI agent, I would be turning in my badge. And you have to seriously question whether or not this organization, which has become a partisan political tool, and its level of corruption is serving any real purpose anymore in the context of this republic. You have a choice to make. You're either with people or you're against them. And kudos to the whistleblower. This is a good guy who made his choice, him or her, made their choice and turned over the email showing Merrick Garland knew the FBI was already tracking parents. That said, even after all the misdeeds come to light, the FBI never apologizes. Lying FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, he just got his pension back after being fired for lying under oath on multiple occasions. He got a CNN contributorship. And guess who gave his pension that was taken away by the Trump DOJ back to McCabe? AG Merrick Garland. Because see, when you're a Marxist, you can lie and you can weaponize and destroy institutions like the FBI and still keep your benefits. And if you want proof of the two-tiered system of justice, look no further than what's playing on your television screen. Just by the way, I read this article a little bit earlier about George Clooney throwing Alec Baldwin under the bus. Alec Baldwin saying, poor me, I should be excused because I'm a celebrity. And you have this 18-year-old kid who's basically having his attorneys defend his life. That's what's happening. His life is at stake. Meanwhile, Alec Baldwin's up vacationing in Vermont with his kids picking pumpkins. Ask yourself this, will the DOJ investigate this far leftist CRT advocate who made open threats at a recent school board meeting in Fort Worth, Texas? Watch this.
I've got over 1,000 soldiers ready to go.
We're not the board. He's
1,000 go. I don't care.
Yeah, we're the police.
My First Amendment rights. My First Amendment rights are here.
The board is in front of you. Not me. If you want to talk to me, I'd be happy to talk to you. But you're not
will not
yell
challenge
at
us.
me.
Time.
Yell at me.
You're not telling us.
Time.
Address the board. Yeah, I'm gonna bring my soldiers with me next time. So real. Not promoted. I'll bet you that.
Can you imagine trying to defend the ideology that was created by a fat, white, racist, anti-Semitic philosopher who never worked a private sector job in his entire life, whose own kids hated him so much that they killed themselves, who was a horrible husband, horrible father, horrible friend, and the biggest contribution that he ever made to this world was to serve as worm food when he was dead. Of course, I'm talking about Karl Marx, and his entire Marxist theory is everything that guy's actually defending right there that you just saw. We don't have a justice system anymore. We have a corrupted authoritarian state, and he regards intelligence agencies as mere partisan extensions to be used as Stasi agencies to force against its own people. Just today, it was announced that the Department of Education's Civil Rights Division launched no less than 3 different investigations into my school district. CRT activists have been working with NBC, and they want to force Department of Education involvement because they keep losing school board seats in our municipal elections by absolute landslides. I mean, sometimes it's like plus 30, a win for our side. And by our side, I mean parents who are opposed to institutionalized Marxist racism masquerading as education. And there have been 3 seats so far that these CRT activists have lost to date. NBC came out with an article today gleefully announcing this, and they made sure to specifically mention the new school board members and smear them, even though 2 were literally only elected late last year, 1 literally just last month, and he's only attended 1 trustee meeting so far. The tentacles of corruption extend everywhere in this administration. Americans are waking up to the reality that the Biden regime is the most authoritarian administration in history, from unlawful vax mandates to censorship of free speech, corruption of health agencies, legacy media, using social media companies as agents of states, attacking the press, the weaponization of the FBI, and surveilling now parents who simply disagree with their biggest donors. And increasingly, Americans see it for what it is, and they don't like it. No wonder so many, have you seen so many counties? I was looking today, a county, Hidalgo County in Texas, super historically blue county, is getting red-pilled. And that's just one case, one example. No wonder the administration has decided to redirect its war on terror. Because now the people this administration fears most of all is you, the average, everyday citizens of the United States. So coming up, a lot of updates out of this Kyle Rittenhouse trial. The defense has gotten so desperate. They've been fighting over cell phones. And Monday, or prosecution rather, has gotten so desperate. They're fighting over cell phones. Defense on Monday filed a mistrial with prejudice motion. They wanted a mistrial. A declaration that they said is predicated upon this crazy video story. You know, the aerial video footage, that was the FBI's, and they had the thermal and then the regular aerial footage. Well, apparently, there was some evidence that was withheld related to this video. We're going to talk about that next with Will Chamberlain. Thanks to Biden's economic policies, job numbers have been abysmal. Inflation still skyrocketing. We talked about it every day this week. Instead of following the former president's pro-business agenda that had the economy booming, Biden wants to tax corporations and pass trillion-dollar bills that we cannot pay for. It's time for you to take proactive steps to protect your wealth and your retirement by investing in gold and precious metals, and Legacy Precious Metals can help. Washington keeps printing money to pay for their outrageous bills, but that just devalues your dollar. Gold offers a hedge against inflation, and as the dollar gets weaker, gold gets stronger. The folks at Legacy Precious Metals are the gold standard when it comes to investing in precious metals. They have a team of experts who can counsel you on the best options for you and your family. Don't leave your retirement to chance. Call Legacy Precious Metals at 866-580-2088 or visit them online to download their free investor's guide full of useful information at legacypminvestments.com. A lot of updates, but still no verdict in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial taking place in Kenosha. The defense team filed a motion for mistrial with prejudice this was on Monday, after it was revealed that the prosecution didn't share the high-def video, the 11 megabyte versus the 4 megabyte of that drone footage, the aerial footage from the FBI that everybody saw in court I guess last week is when it came out. The prosecution I felt like I was watching the worst boomer fight in the history of the world. The prosecution is blaming the defense's Android, and apparently nobody knows about Dropbox. And the defense is calling out the prosecution. They did this just a couple hours ago. Watch.
Every other piece of evidence from the state crime lab in this situation has been provided to us via Dropbox. Dropbox provides an exact forensic copy of what they have. The file title name in this situation should have been exactly the same as the one provided to the state if it was the exact same copy. The file name was nowhere near similar. The file I received originally on Friday the 5th was not labeled that same and was not the same file amount. There's no way that what ADA Krause is saying is true, because the file name would not have changed if my computer was compressing anything. It was a different file that we were provided from what was provided to the state.
That was a woman, Mrs. Whisk, and her first name escapes me. We're following all of this right before we sit down to talk about it with you. Here to discuss this and all of these insane updates is Will Chamberlain, a lawyer and co-publisher for Human Events. He's been following this case since day one, and he had a great thread the other day rehashing what he was saying last year about the weapons charges, and that was very nice to see. You were proven right on that, because a lot of people, even people that were on the right, were kind of attacking you over that. Will, it's good to see you, and also see you vindicated on that. I got to get your reaction to this though, because this concerns that video. Apparently, now correct me where I'm wrong, it was a lot of back and forth with this. There was an 11 megabyte original video that was HD quality, very clear, that prosecution had. That's what they played during trial, but they only provided defense with a compressed 4 megabyte file that you can see the difference. It was super pixelated, and it's really hard to see any kind of specific detail. And so the defense was saying that prosecution had withheld this video. Prosecution was saying, even though that they had submitted every other evidentiary element, graphics, video, all of this stuff through Dropbox, etc., this was the one thing that they didn't, and someone texted it apparently, and then prosecution was saying that's because your Android was bad. I mean, am I hearing this correctly? Is this our justice system?
You are hearing it correctly. It is extremely concerning, and I think there's a very strong chance that even if there's a guilty verdict in this case, that it gets thrown out either for a mistrial with or without prejudice, because I mean, it's a Brady violation if you are keeping evidence from the defense, especially evidence that could be exculpatory. And especially when it's clear that this evidence is very much central to how the jury is going to rule, right? The jury is currently asking for more video evidence and the chance to review more video evidence, including these videos. That's really a huge problem. And I mean, it's a general theme. I think the prosecutors have run out of good faith. They made a ridiculous excuse. Again, this idea that it's like, oh, your computer, your phone is the one that compressed this file, and the fact that the woman working for the defense attorneys, I'm not sure she's an attorney herself, but she's on the defense team, right, certainly, and she's just saying, well, no, that's wrong. This would be the same file name. If what you're saying is true and our computer compressed it, it would have the exact same file name as yours. That's not what happened here. You sent us a different file.
Was that deliberate, in your opinion? Because I know there's a lot of discussion and suspicion about malicious prosecution. Do you think that was purposeful on the part of the state?
I don't know. I mean, it's like I'm reluctant to immediately assume bad faith, because I think these guys are pretty incompetent. And so, as a general rule, stupidity is usually a better explanation for bad behavior than malice. That said, I think, maybe they've lost that presumption of good faith, because there are things I think were malicious. I think certainly the willingness to bring up an issue that had been excluded in a previous order by the judge, the willingness to bring up like Kyle's silence or lack thereof by Mr. Binger. I get the sense that he's the kind of guy who likes to push the rules as much as they can. And the other thing is, I think their excuses are BS. I think maybe they didn't intend. I think they probably intended to send all the pieces of evidence over, especially towards the end of the trial. That's my guess. But I think that their habit is their habit is just to dissemble and to gaslight the judge and be like, oh, it's actually their fault. It's not our fault. We didn't do anything wrong, rather than take ownership of the mistakes they made. And that's just a consistent theme I've seen about the trial. So even if it wasn't malicious at the outset, even if they probably wanted to ensure that the defense had all the evidence to avoid a mistrial, a Brady violation, they're certainly not willing to take ownership of any mistakes they made.
I wanted to get your thoughts, Will, also on some of the speculation that we're hearing that there might be one or two jurors that are hesitant to acquit because they're worried about maybe media or community blowback, which wouldn't be an issue if they were sequestered, which kind of blows my mind that they're not sequestered. The only time I've ever seen a trial in recent memory of this profile, this type profile, was this sentencing phase in the Mike Brown case, wherein that jury for that was not sequestered, but in the criminal trial they were sequestered, from my understanding. But in this, is there any good reason why the judge did not have them sequestered? I mean, the trial's in Kenosha. They're in Kenosha. There were reports that people were filming them as they were getting on the bus. What is your thought on this?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think that in general, they're so reluctant to do sequestration because it's so disruptive to the lives of the jurors, right? They basically get they're under house arrest for 2 weeks away from their families and their job, and so say they have somebody they have to take care of, pets. I mean, it's very, very disruptive to the lives of jurors in ways that merely jury duty is not. So they're generally reluctant to do it. I don't know. That's a place where I just don't have a lot of familiarity, where I don't really feel comfortable being like, there should have been sequestration here or not. That's where my lack of criminal practice comes into play. But I do know that things like the fact that you have the people are able to protest right outside the building, that's clearly something that could be restricted on time, place, and manner restrictions. Not saying that people should have the right to protest, but they shouldn't be protesting in earshot of the jury. That's horrible, right? We don't. That's a great point. Pressure on the jury.
I actually haven't heard that before. I mean, because they are, and we've been seeing this, film footage, everywhere, and they are right there on the steps of the courthouse. That's actually a really good point, because I don't know how the jurors wouldn't see that when they arrive. And I mean, I understand they have their right to protest, but there's also the right of due process, which is going to obviously be impeded if they feel intimidated.
Right, and I think this is a very straightforward time, place, manner restriction that would be perfectly suitable, right? There's plenty of places in Kenosha, even nearby, a block or two away, where you could have essentially allow all the protests in the world. It's just, we really do not want external influence on our jurors. That's the core of due process in this country. And we're not going to do sequestration. If there's a lot of things we're not going to do to try and make the disruption to the jurors' lives as minimal as possible, then certainly we shouldn't just force them to walk through a gauntlet of protesters or deliberate while they hear chants of KKK Kyle, no justice, no peace outside. That's absurd.
Yeah, that's kind of it amazes me. I wanted to get clarification on this too. So mistrial with prejudice, if that is ultimately what happens here, Rittenhouse walks free at that point, correct?
Right. Yeah. So with prejudice means you can't do it again. Right. That's the concept. So if you dismiss a case of prejudice,
but they could do it without.
Correct. Right. In fact, there was a motion for a mistrial without prejudice today, also made by the defense counsel. They basically said, look, even if you don't think that it was intentional bad faith that they didn't provide us this video, it's still unfair. So you still need to have a mistrial. It wouldn't be a fair trial. So, if we don't have to litigate good or bad faith, was the defense's argument. We think there should at minimum be a mistrial without prejudice, because it was just unfair that we didn't have access to this video.
Is that indicative, you think, of the defense getting a little worried about what kind of verdict is coming out? If it's,
yeah, they're getting a little
making
jittery,
me feel good, Will lie.
Yeah, no, it's I saw that, and I don't know how you could take that, except that the defense lawyers are getting a little jittery, because I think that before they would have been a lot more confident. I think going into jury deliberations, they were extremely confident, right? The trial in general had gone very well for them. They had, ruined prosecution witnesses. The judge had been yelling at the prosecutors the whole time. The basically prosecution spent a whole bunch of time impeaching its own witnesses. It was not going well. And it's just, the problem is that this is one of those weird trials where actually the longer it goes on, the worse it seems for the defense, because the quickest way out of this trial for the jury would have been a finding of self-defense and then acquittal on all counts, because self-defense just would be a privilege for everything. But that clearly didn't happen. And so now I think the jury's worried that they're never going to get to that consensus on self-defense. And so they're just worried that there's a risk of a guilty verdict, which is why they would be willing to kind of run it back with a new trial.
Yeah, talking with Will Chamberlain. Will, last question for you. I know that the judge had instructed the jury that they could consider lesser charges, because normally, if you're a prosecutor, you don't want to overshoot and go for something that is, because I've talked to so many prosecutors that have explained, in criminal trials, we don't want to go to the point where it's actually difficult for us to prove the case. So we'll maybe go, maybe perhaps a charge lower, so that we know we can nail that one. What are your thoughts about the potential of maybe some of those lesser charges if they don't get him on murder, which would be lifetime in jail?
I mean, in a legal sense, I think those verdicts would be nearly inexplicable, right? Because basically self-defense is going to be a defense to all of those charges. The only, I could go into detail about, there's one case where it's kind of an exception, which is the reckless endangerment, i.e. that, there's an argument that he recklessly endangered the journalist. And obviously Kyle doesn't have the self-defense privilege vis-a-vis the journalist. So that's not how that would work, but rather if he was acting as self-defense, his conduct wouldn't be reckless in the first place, right? If he was acting in reasonable self-defense.
Right. That makes sense.
But as a general matter, like this is one of those cases where the jury really should come back with, basically an acquittal on all counts or a guilty on almost all of them, maybe not the first degree murder, but like almost everything else, because if it's not self-defense, then the guy intentionally shot people and killed them. Right. So, if that conduct's not privileged, then this should be a very serious crime. And so the lesser included, a verdict that's sort of trying to split the baby, give him a lesser included, some sort of weird second degree reckless charge wouldn't make much sense as a matter of law. But I guess maybe, this is one of those things where I think the prosecutors at the outset going into deliberations were not that enthusiastic, were not optimistic. And so they wanted to just give the jury any chance they could to convict.
Boy, the longer this thing goes, the worse it is. Maybe, I don't think we're going to see anything today, maybe this week. I'm not quite sure. Yeah. Will Chamberlain, always a pleasure. Thanks, Will, for your time today.
Absolutely. Happy to be here, Dana.
Thanks. All right, folks, coming up. So how's Kenosha planning to handle public safety? Are they going to have a repeat of August 2020? Wisconsin Congressman Bryan Steil, this is his district. He joins me next to break it all down. You have homeowners insurance for a good reason, because without it, a fire, flood, or burglary could destroy you financially. But there's another major crime that your homeowner's policy does not cover, and it's called home title fraud. The FBI calls title fraud one of the fastest growing crimes, and it can ruin you financially, which is why you need Home Title Lock. Title fraud happens when a criminal forges your signature on documents stating that you sold your home to them. And then they can take out loans against your home and leave you with payments. You'll spend a fortune in legal fees trying to prove that you didn't commit fraud. Home Title Lock puts a barrier around your home's title, and the instant they detect anyone, from a cyber thief to a renter or a relative trying to horn in on your home's title, they help shut it down. Visit HometitleLock.com, register your address to see if you could potentially be a victim, and enter code RADIO for 30 free days of protection. That's code RADIO at HometitleLock.com. Tensions continue to rise in Kenosha as we await the verdict in the Rittenhouse trial. A lot of back and forth today on a lot of procedure and technicalities as well. Wisconsin Congressman Bryan Steil is with me now to break down how authorities in his district are going to handle any potential threats. Congressman, thank you so much for being here. It's good to see you. We were reading about how 500 National Guardsmen have been called out. And I just kept thinking, I'm sure that a lot of those Kenosha business members would have loved to have seen that back in August of 2020 when there was no response, and you had all these videos of people who were just trying to protect their businesses, and it didn't go so well for them. I wanted to get your thoughts on the buildup, I guess, for the lack of a better way to put it, ahead of this verdict.
Yeah, Kenosha is a great community, family-loving, hardworking town. And what played out last summer in the community of Kenosha absolutely did not have to happen if we provided the resources that were needed to establish public safety immediately after the incidents that played out Sunday night. And so Sunday night, we had no National Guard troops. Monday, after that, we got to 125. We only made it to 250 by the time we got to Tuesday. That's abysmal. Governor of the state of Wisconsin had the opportunity to dramatically increase that force. I was on the phone with the President of the United States, President Donald Trump, on Tuesday all day. He offered assistance to our governor. Our governor turned his offer of assistance down. Bad went to worse Tuesday night, and now the jury is having deliberations based on what played out on Tuesday night. But the lesson learned is we should have never been there in the first place. And now is to look this jury to come back with their verdict in the near term, whatever the outcome is. People need to ultimately express themselves in a peaceful and law-abiding manner. There's a clear line between the First Amendment right to express yourself in criminal behavior and what we had play out in Kenosha last summer, as well as communities all across the United States, is Democratic, liberal officials look the other way while criminal behavior was occurring on the streets, and the result was the destruction of property, serious bodily injury, and the loss of life across the country. None of this should have occurred, and it wouldn't have if we stood with the men and women of law enforcement. We stood for law and order, and we prevented criminal behavior from happening in the first place.
That's a great point, Congressman, because I don't even think we would never know Kyle Rittenhouse's name if there had been the guard presence there, apparently that they're going to be here ahead of the verdict. We wouldn't even be having this conversation.
And we shouldn't be having this conversation. We should have had the resources there immediately, rather than incendiary comments by elected leaders off of a short 9-second video where they thought they knew all the facts. What we should have had was people calling for public safety, people calling for law and order, allowing people to express themselves in a legal First Amendment manner, but not allowing criminal behavior to play out. It's so essential. Now we're told we have roughly 500 National Guard troops on standby. We should have had that on the first night in Kenosha. We should have never been here in the first place. And the people of Kenosha were ultimately let down by our governor and political leaders who made political decisions to not stand with the men and women of law enforcement. And that's the lesson learned here. You got to support local law enforcement to maintain public safety.
I've been to Kenosha. It's a beautiful area. I mean, Wisconsin's beautiful. I wanted to take all of your cheese curds back with me. I mean, it was the most delicious thing I've ever had in my life. No one gets it right. I know people tell me go to Culver's. They don't even come close to what you have in Wisconsin. And everybody was so friendly, and Kenosha is such a beautiful town. And from some of the stuff that I've seen, just even video footage of this week from outside as the trial has progressed, there are businesses, from recent footage, that still have their big giant storefront windows boarded up. That the city is still recovering from everything that it went through. Talk a little bit about that if you can, and we'll move on to some of the other stuff I know that you've been dealing with in DC. But I worry so much for those business owners, people whose entire livelihoods they've tried to build it back up again, and now they could lose it all over again.
The scars from such a traumatic experience last a long time. I did the 4th of July parade in the community of Kenosha this year. Walked down one of the major streets, and as you come into downtown, there are still a handful of buildings with boards up. One of the most powerful that I saw on the 4th of July was a building that says "People live here" with an arrow pointing up. Many individuals who live in apartments, one above businesses, were painting that on the boards of the businesses below because that's where they lived. That's the type of criminals that were engaging in behavior in the city of Kenosha. They were burning buildings where innocent families were living above those buildings. Overall, the community of Kenosha has come back strong. The community is coming together. There was a lot of individuals from outside the community coming in from other areas around the country who are looking to do destruction in the city of Kenosha. The key here is when the jury reaches its verdict to keep people from outside Kenosha out of Kenosha. We don't want people coming into our community causing destruction and damage. And what we should have had going back to last summer is a law enforcement presence capable of doing just that and maintaining public safety. A lot of lessons learned from last summer. And really, the lesson learned is when Democrats call to defund the police, when Democrats refuse to stand with the men and women of law enforcement, there are catastrophic consequences in Kenosha firsthand, and it never should have happened.
Yeah, that's a great reminder, too, as well. I think they said 25 or 26 of the arrests of people who are actively engaged in arson and property destruction were from California and Oregon. I was reading about that today. That is mind-blowing. I want to pivot, Congressman, because in D.C., you were criticizing, very critical of there's the reconciliation, you have the Build Back Better, which is not building anything back better. But you made a really interesting point, and I was actually looking at your comments about this, wherein you were addressing the economic disparity that's ultimately this committee from Nancy Pelosi, which is ultimately really pushing. This stuff actually magnifies, multiplies poverty. It doesn't help to lift people out of it, but they use this to push socialism. They're using disparity and this class warfare. It's a Marxist tactic. You'd spoken out about this a little earlier. I wonder if you could speak about it a little bit now when you were criticizing this.
I serve as the ranking member on the Select Committee on the Economy. I ask people to follow us at Economy GOP. We're there on the front lines of defending American capitalism against the socialist policies of the far left. And what the Democrats are trying to do is jam through a massive amount of new government social spending. How do they do it? One of their techniques is to have government policies that put in place because of the way that they're measuring, in particular, poverty. There is poverty in this country. We need to address it. But what we need to make sure we do is understand how the Democrats are measuring things like poverty. If you look just at the poverty measure in particular, it measures earned income against housing costs and against food costs. What it doesn't include are all the government programs that are already in existence. Inside the poverty measure, it doesn't count food stamps. It doesn't count Section 8 housing vouchers. It doesn't count the earned income tax credit. And I think most surprisingly to people is it doesn't count the stimulus payments that Democrats continue to give to individuals across the United States. And so at the committee today, I made the point that if the previous stimulus checks that came out under the Biden administration, if those stimulus checks were $1 million a person, that wouldn't move the poverty needle 1 inch because it's not included in the poverty count. And so they're using the poverty measure by the federal government as justification for massive new social spending. We're trying to make this clear to the American people and really call out the Democrats who just want to continue to spend money.
There you go. Congressman Bryan Steil from the beautiful state of Wisconsin. We're praying for your district, Congressman, praying for everybody there in Kenosha. Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So coming up, experts are trying to now ruin Thanksgiving. The push for mandated boosters and guides on how to disinvite or deal with unvaccinated family members, those dirty, unwashed masses. We'll break it down next. Stay with us. The first TV was named after the First Amendment of the Constitution, the right to speak out about what we believe and what we think and our passions and pursuits. It's one of the most fundamental things about being an American. And so in choosing the name for the network, we had no idea how important and timely a decision that would be. Freedom of speech is more important, more vital than it has ever been. So join us. Activate and become part of that fight and visit thefirsttv.com/support or the First TV app and learn how you can join the fight by supporting the First. Black Rifle Coffee is not your typical coffee company. Black Rifle Coffee develops their explosive roast profiles with the same mission focus they learned while serving in the military. They've spent thousands of hours tasting, sourcing, and perfecting coffee from all across the world. Being founded and operated by veterans, Black Rifle Coffee knows what a quality cup of coffee means to active duty troops that are away from home for the holidays. Black Rifle Coffee is committed to supporting all who serve. And with every purchase you make, Black Rifle Coffee gives back. In 2020 alone, they donated over 6 million cups of coffee to soldiers overseas, law enforcement officers, wildland firefighters on the West Coast, medical workers during the COVID-19 response. And this November, for every coffee purchase you make, a bag of their limited edition holiday roast will be sent to a service member overseas for delivery by Christmas morning. So help support the cause and visit blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV and check out the freshest coffee in America. blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV gets you 20% off coffee, apparel, and gear, plus 20% off your first month of the Coffee Club. Thanksgiving can be a very, very stressful time for tyrannists and Marxists. One, finding something to be grateful about when you're a Marxist is so hard. It's such a challenge. Everything would be so much better if you were in charge and ruining the country. And America sucks, so there's no being thankful for your country. And being a progressive leftist, even if you're thankful for just like something, it's the usual stuff. Like you're thankful for being smarter and more immoral than everyone else, and you thank yourself for that since you don't believe that there's a God to give thanks to. Well, now, to add to all of this Thanksgiving stress, the Marxists are already getting antsy about Thanksgiving for another reason. They have to be around their backwards relatives. It's like a thing every year, isn't it? So in the last few years, article after article offers counsel to these snowflake Marxists about how to deal with relatives who might vote differently than them, or like have habits wherein they support the police or they fly the American flag on their porch. Now, on top of it all, anti-MAGA and Uncle Anti-Vaxxer Vinny are endangering your very life by not being injected with a government solution, and they don't wear face panties either, or masks. Well, you can stop hyperventilating, Democrats. CNN's all over it. In a new article, they offer an array of ideas for how to handle Thanksgiving with your unvaxxed and unwashed kinfolk. First, the CNN piece wants you to know that if you must spend Thanksgiving with possible domestic terrorists that happen to be your relatives, you're safest outdoors. That's right. Never mind that your great-grandma is likely going to die after being exposed to below freezing temperatures. It's a risk she'll have to take to keep you healthy. Have your aunt just pass you some turkey through the window. After all, the vaccine is like a raincoat, the CNN article says. It'll protect you during a rainstorm. But if you're in a thunderstorm, you'll still get wet, meaning standing inside next to the candied yams, really, they're sweet potatoes. We'll fight. And your unmasked great-grandma that watches Fox News could get some of her icky virus on you. Maybe it's better just not see your great-grandma in person ever again. Like, you can always see her at her funeral when she's no longer a threat to you, like at a safe distance. Maybe you could even request that a mask be placed on her when she's in the casket. CNN didn't say that, but Brett did. But the point is that you can't be too careful. The CNN article also says that you have to take the threat from your leprous extended family in stride. So if you've had your vaccination, your booster, and you've prayed to your Dr. Fauci statue that morning, you should be fine. Now, most people don't end up in the hospital with the Rona. That's right. CNN only, in fact, 1 to 5% of all cases do, and they always have secondary conditions. But good to see the CNN article being sensible. Finally, the CNN piece reminds progressives that boundaries are loving. So you can always just skip Thanksgiving with grandma altogether this year. The article advises that you could say something like this to let grandma down easy, quote, "We love spending time with you, and I also recognize that you want connections so much, and it's not so important for you to wear a mask or follow procedures, but for us it is. Love you, want to see you, how about coming over to our house another time," end quote. That's right, progressives, you can see grandma another time, like on a Zoom call when you're using the toilet. Or maybe she could swing by for Thanksgiving in 2031 when Darth Fauci gets his plague under control and you've had your 43rd Pfizer booster. No need to risk your life now. You're too grateful for being the one and only you to let your selfish granny, who's loved you unconditionally and put up with all of your annoying things, to get anywhere near you unless she's triple vaxxed, quadruply boosted, and double masked. And if grandma dies from asphyxiation or freezing outside or just plain loneliness, she'll have given her life for a good cause, preserving yours. That does it for us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, and don't bend the knee.